Now we're recording. Welcome. Welcome. Okay, just a bit of housekeeping. Just ask everyone to mute their microphones if they could. Thank you to Trent. We're recording the session because we post these up on a YouTube channel. So if you've got any concerns about being recorded, please turn your cameras off. And if you have any questions, by all means, please enter those in the chat. And I'll go through kind of our speakers for today, but towards the end we'll have a Q. We've left a bit of time for Q&A, so we'll go through those. As I mentioned, this is the first part in a series. The next two parts we're going to go into a little bit more detail in terms of creating an academic CV, and and part 3, managing social media presence, Thursday 8th of October. So I'll be sending out invites for those if any of those also take your interest. But to get to matters at hand, today's speakers, we've got some great speakers that I think will give us quite a variety of perspectives. We've got Dr. Tyne Sumner, who's going to talk about the pros and cons of academic websites and some things to consider. Dr. Kate Coleman from MGSE, who's be discussing digital portfolios. Dr. Emily Fitzgerald from MDAP, who will be explaining some of the institutional support through Minerva and data repositories. And finally, I'm going to wrap up just with a bit of a technical investigation into spinning up some websites using a technology called Netlify. So we've been doing a little bit of research in that. And then finally, as I mentioned, we'll be having some Q&A. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Tyne, who's the first speaker.
Thanks, Greg. Fantastic. Can everyone see this presentation? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, hi everyone, my name's Tyne Sumner. I'm an early career researcher and currently in a role in a team called Digital Transformation Operations at the university. I have a background in digital skills training, literary studies, digital humanities, and I'm really passionate about encouraging and supporting the researchers, early career researchers' careers and PhD students' careers, especially when it comes to digital approaches and methods. So what I'm going to just take you through, first of all, in our session today, is a presentation that covers a little bit of a landscape scan, if you will, of what it means to produce an academic website or a personal website or a combination of the two, some pros and cons, and some examples. So I've called my little presentation here Doors of Perception, which is a quote by the well-known English poet and painter William Blake. But I think in the context of your career and the digital milieu and the decision of what to put online and what to do when it comes to digital websites, you're thinking a lot about which doors are you opening, which doors are you closing, and what are the strategies and methods and information that you can think about that might open certain doors. Okay, just make sure I can move along. So I'll cover 3 things very briefly. Why would we do something like this? Why would we create an academic website? I'll look at a couple of examples of well-known scholars, and I've chosen 3 scholars who work in broadly conceived the digital humanities field, and then I've just put together 10 tips or tricks. So why should I create a website? I thought I'd start by, an academic website rather, I thought I'd start by making this a little bit interactive, and I just want to give you 2 minutes or maybe 60 seconds to type into the chat in this Zoom presentation, what's maybe the top thing you would hope to get out of an academic website, or what's the main reason you think you'd create one? So Greg, I might get you to read out some of the the things people are typing into the chat, because I can't see the chat from my screen share,
I
unfortunately.
would be happy to, Tyne.
Thank you.
I think increased visibility, to be found, sharing research with a wider audience, because I'm awesome. Nice work.
Excellent.
Big shout out there to Trent. Publicity, representing the different aspects of research. And I suppose that's touching with academic and non-academic audiences. Again, publicity, sharing my research and narrative. It's really interesting. Being found by Google searches, share my research in an accessible way, promote publications, very important. Practice as research. So I want to have projects available to grant bodies and public, along with links to research. Creating awareness. Not clear on what it adds to my Find an Expert profile, so looking forward to finding out. It's a good point. So obviously, I think the consensus is to reach some wider audiences and be able to communicate research findings.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I hope just in seeing some of the ideas that other people, other researchers have popped into the chat there, you found something useful, or maybe that has provoked something you haven't thought of by way of why you might go about this. Here is my list, and this is very just sort of skimming the surface, and some of these have already been touched on in suggestions people put in the chat, but obviously promotion. Not everyone wants to continually promote themselves 24/7, but if you're of the mind that you'd like people to engage with your research and you'd like them to be able to see more detailed information about your research, a personal website obviously allows you to have control ultimately over the snippets or the whole or the ways in which you want to carve up that information. And also if you want to take some of your more formally published research and turn it inside out and turn it back outwards to a different kind of audience. The second point that I think may explain why you would want to create an academic website is impact. And this is so that you might be able to measure the impact of your research internally using your own tools. So site traffic, alt metrics, and maybe also if you've got a more informal aspect to your academic website by way of something like a blog, you're able to monitor how much engagement there is in terms of people writing information, writing comments in relation to your work. The third point I wanted to touch on was collaboration. And I don't think this is often one that we think of, especially because of the need to promote one's own research and the need to showcase the work that you're doing as an individual researcher. But an academic website can be a really great opportunity to showcase collaboration, particularly if you're also looking to collaborate. So if you're, for instance, having informal conversations with other researchers and you want someone to be able to think about how they might collaborate with you, whether that be for a paper, whether that be for a research grant, sending them to your personal academic website might be the best way to showcase the broad range of things that you're interested in. Grants is another one. Someone mentioned in the chat, find an expert profile, and obviously we'll talk a little bit about an ORCID ID in a little bit. But if you want a central source of truth for the way that you've decided to present all of your research materials, career profile, and the way that you think about and write about your work, then having a website to be able to link off to from a grant application is a very useful one-stop shop, if you will. Someone also mentioned the word narrative, so telling multiple stories about your profile or work. And I'll get to that in a little bit when we look at some examples. Finally, connecting the dots. This is really important, and Dr. Kate Coleman will talk a little bit about this in a moment, which is to say that there is a plethora of information about most people on the internet, and there are an increasing number of identification sites, if you will, for where you can showcase information about your research. A personal academic website can have high value if you want to collect all of these things in one place. So connecting the dots across the various points of contact that someone might find about you if they were to try and discover your research. And I've got three more, so that wasn't the last one. Writing for a non-specialist audience. We talk a lot about this these days, so writing for different audiences, writing informally in various news media and so on and so forth. If you don't quite feel up to the challenge of getting pieces of your writing into the conversation or the chronicle or so on and so forth, trialing some of that material out on a personal academic website can be a really good idea. And finally, I'll jump ahead and just mention the final one, which is keeping your work current. Probably the biggest con when people talk about maintaining and developing a website is the fact that you have to keep it current. So if someone attends your website and suddenly they realize that the last thing you posted on there was from 2012, not a particularly good look. So if you feel like you want something to keep you current and keep you updating your work, then it might be a great option. So I'm just going to quickly run through 3 examples. So these are 3 scholars who have been particularly effective at crafting and curating their personal academic websites. And they're quite different, and I'll just draw your attention to a couple of key things here. So Tim Sherratt, who's a well-known figure in Australian digital humanities, has done an enormous amount of work on a platform called Glam Workbench and with the Trove Open Data Repository. You can see on his landing page here, you've got a bunch of icons along the bottom that draw your attention to various ways that you can interact with Sherratt's work in various locations. But the landing page on this academic website is very straightforward. Top, say, 5 things that you need to know in a snapshot. As we move through, though, you can see here that, and this is to my point about linking the various identities of yourself that sort of linger around on the web, accounts and identifiers. So the personal academic website here becomes the one place where all of these different ways in which you can interact with this person's research through ORCID, Zotero, GitHub, to access the data that Tim is working with, can all be found in this location. Rupika Rism, and I'm showing you this example because Rism's work engages across a whole range of different areas. So Rism's a scholar who's working at the intersection of digital humanities infrastructure, digital humanities, race theory, a whole range of disciplinary fields that intersect with each other in unique ways. And you can see on this academic website that the main focus on the landing page is featured projects. So I'm showing you this to give a sense that there's different ways to, I suppose, animate the kind of things you're working on, and there's no one way of crafting a narrative about what it is that you do. You can see here too that the information section on this website can be particularly powerful, not just because it tells a clear story about what it is that you're doing, but you can link off to a whole range of projects that you're involved with, prospective projects, a book project that you might have landed but are still working on and doesn't have a formal publication site. How am I doing for time? I might just hurry up. And finally, Miriam Posner, who is another scholar working in the digital humanities space. This is, I think, a really interesting homepage for an academic website. Really straightforward, clear, about CV blog. The interesting thing here too about Posner's academic website, it's linking off to courses being taught. So if you're working across a range of projects, research, and you're also teaching, and you're also potentially doing workshops that involve either open or semi-open data, or you're interested in sharing materials about what it is that you're doing in those workshops, this can be a particularly powerful way to communicate the broad spectrum of all the things that you're working on. So with that in mind, 10 quick tips and tricks. Some of these are very perhaps obvious and straightforward, but simplicity is the best approach, I think. So number 1, if you are thinking of putting together an academic website, put together a plan. Cannot be underestimated. Don't start tinkering with a WordPress, getting deep into the nitty-gritty of Squarespace or hiring someone to make it for you if you don't have a plan. Who do you actually want to communicate with? What is your intent? What's in scope? What's out of scope? Really critical, and this is a great way to just get going if you're not feeling that you have enough material to start with. Write a summary of your research, 2 or 3 paragraphs that communicate what it is that you're interested in to a lay audience. This is a non-specialist audience. So if someone were to arrive on your website, they're instantly engaged by what it is that you're doing. Some of the other speakers will refer to this, but think about whether you'd like to extend the reach and impact of your research data. So your academic website could be an interface to the various platforms on which you might be hosting some of the data that you're working with. Number 4, consider multiple avenues, audiences, and places for your writing. So this website can become, again, a one-stop shop for all of the various places that you want to communicate the research that you're doing. Use social media to your advantage. You might have seen on one of the examples before, you might link off from your academic website to your Twitter feed. You might also use a Twitter feed or a social media feed to promote your personal website. So think critically about the way that all of these various sort of digital spaces hang together, and what is the most effective use of your time in maintaining them and drawing people's attention to them. Number 6, to blog or not to blog. I'm just going to leave that there. Maybe we can have a discussion about that one in the Q&A. Get in touch with your research office. Number 7. A lot of research office staff are specialists in this area. They'll be able to give you information about what's a useful way to present your research, what is a useful way to structure your research if you're thinking about applying for grants, especially collaborative larger grants, and some ways that they can help you craft materials and think about the kinds of information that will be useful further along in your career trajectory to put online and how to structure those. Number 8 may seem really straightforward, but if you are going to create a personal website and allow your digital narrative to hang together coherently, think about how you're going to link off via things like your email signature and linking different profiles in that space. Number 8, register for an ORCID ID. Number 9, utilize collaboration opportunities. I talked a little bit about this before, but allow your academic website to become a site in which you are able to invite other people in to write with you, to contest ideas with you, and to share materials in one space. And finally, number 10, think about ways in which you'd like to make your research available and open. I will leave it there. That has been a bit of a roller coaster through 3 different things, and look forward to chatting more about this in a Q&A. I can just stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tyne. Okay, so next up we've got Dr. Kate Coleman.
It was awesome, Tyne. Thank you. I'm going to cancel.
We're like a well-oiled machine here. We're right on time.
Excellent.
It is good. All right, I'm going to set my timer then so I know, because I want to keep myself to 10 minutes so you have time to talk. So I've taken this kind of pathway on mapping. The work that I do in digital portfolios, or what they're kind of referred to in the education space, is as e-portfolios. And I've been doing that for a long time. It's my major research space, and I've really been in it as a visual artist since I came into education, and I realised that there were a kind of beginning of thinking about e-portfolios as accessible items in courses outside of the arts that didn't seem to really understand what it is that portfolios were or how they functioned. And so for those of you from arts backgrounds, we have a pretty consistent understanding of what it means to collect and curate and to represent your work. It's a part of our practice. But it came into education about 20 years ago and really became an assessment piece. And in that, I found great problems. And it's why I ended up as a researcher in that environment, as an educational researcher with an arts-based practice, because I just thought that there was this thing which often happens in our disciplinary degrees in higher education, where we see something picked up and moved to another disciplinary space without the understanding of what it means to actually do it. And Tyne has enabled the things that we understand as arts-based practitioners in portfolios, but they're often bits that are left out, which is that you do have narratives, multiple identities, multiple spaces that you indicate your work in. Now, as arts practitioners, we're accustomed to that, but it's a kind of new thing to think about how you would actually share that, be outside of the arts, and how you bring your digital and physical selves together And do you choose to make them together, or do you keep those identities separate? All of that work actually needs to be paid close attention to, because the kind of interconnections or the interplay between your digital identity and your portfolio, as well as your social media spaces, as well as all of the things, and I can keep saying as well as academia.edu, as well as your Google Scholar pages, as well as, you know, you can just keep thinking about how they all connect to each other. You don't want them to tell different narratives though, particularly if you are after something, you know, in your career that you need to tell a consistent story around. So in that, I teach in art and design education. My teachers all complete their first year of work with me with a portfolio to get them into that portfolio practice, into what we would call in portfolio research a habit of mind. One of the difficult things that you would know even in your data management is the habit of mind to actually continue to reflect and to, within that reflection, curate carefully around what it is that you're keeping, what it is that you're storing, how it is that you're presenting those storage, those containers of knowledge, and how you keep them together, how you keep them active and how you keep them present. And so mapping them together rather than having these disparate things that I've indicated in my image, but how they actually might start to draw connections between them is the bit of work that needs to happen to do the top 10 that Tyne was just talking about. Because otherwise what you have to do, and we use this metaphor in digital portfolios a lot, is to upkeep multiple gardens. Now, if you have one garden and a balcony, you know that just looking after 2 of those spaces is enough. If you're running 10 digital garden spaces, how you actually keep them connected to each other and keep them relevant becomes a problem. Now, in arts-based work, we're used to that because there is work that you've got to pull from the past up to the present. And then there's work that you discard because you're telling this continuous story about who you are as a visual artist or performing artist. But outside of the arts, those practices are really important to think about in the way that we do that work. When I have to speak to somebody in a gallery, or I want to talk to somebody in the university about my work, each narrative has to be told in a different way. So the work that I've done around this is around mapping the selves. And so how do you sit down and do that work that Tyne was just talking about? How do you connect the dots? Grayson Perry develops, for me, some of the most amazing epistemic maps. And they give me a nice image of what it means to develop this consistent story about myself, for me, as an arts-based educational researcher. So I'm already working across 3 large disciplinary spaces. How do I actually tell a consistent story that demonstrates to my field, to my students, to my work colleagues, and to the art community that my work actually matters? And the kind of so what of a digital portfolio then has to be at place. Who am I telling that story to, and how am I telling them? Means that this mapping work is actually really important basic work. In the teaching of e-portfolios, if they're embedded in a program, this is what we teach to students. When I work with academics and I design, co-design with them the kinds of needs they have for their digital portfolios, it's the same. It's where is your stuff already? And how are you upkeeping all of that stuff? Normally I would, in a workshop, and academics will do this maybe sometimes for even 45 minutes, including early career researchers and PhDs. They might have 20, 30 different post-it notes of all of the places where all their stuff is. That mapping is the first step to then work out how you can at least start to connect the dots between some of those things, and then use the other sites and places, do some placemaking work around the kinds of spaces that your field actually need you to have work in. For some of us, depending on the precarity of our roles, I know when I was a sessional educator, for me, my front-facing portfolio had to be LinkedIn, and then I had multiple sites sitting behind it. As a full-time academic, my ORCID has now become my front face, and then I have multiple maps sitting in behind it. Each one of you will know the place that your work has to sit. The front face of the folio is the most important part, and that it isn't one place, and one website won't solve it. I have multiple Omeka sites, for instance. How I connect those Omekas, I haven't yet brought together because I haven't decided how those map making activities will actually connect them. But they're functioning data portfolios for different projects. The story that I choose to tell when I bring them together will connect them. And where I connect them, I then have to pay really close attention to, so that the right people land there and then head into that omeka? Or do I want them to land on my orchid first and then go to my omekas? Do I want them to land in my find an expert? And if it is find an expert, then you've got to upkeep that. You need to go into Themis, God forbid, and fix that thing so that it's actually telling that really lovely story about you. And those bubbles that are sitting at the top will start to shift and morph depending on the kinds of metadata that's sitting within your profile. But it won't do that unless you upkeep it. So the front face for me in a portfolio pedagogy is really important, and then connecting the kinds of things that sit behind it. For me, map making work then is really important. Stephanie Springay's work is in research creation, particularly around theories of map making, and how they ask us to think about the process instead of the object of maps. And the process of portfolio work is the work. How I'm connecting, how I'm building, how I'm making connections, who I'm telling a story to, and what I'm telling a story for, is all of that kind of connective work that I need to make. And then to play with my favorite book in the world, A Field Guide to Getting Lost, which I think is like the guidebook to academia, that maps are deeply selective. I'm making really careful decisions about the kind of story that I'm telling. And when I'm a PhD student, the story that I'm telling is an incredibly different one to when I'm a senior lecturer. And my portfolios have had to indicate that shift across my work so that I can actually make really clear narrative decisions about the story that I'm telling. And what then are the artifacts? And this is the language of portfolios, which is different to website building. But what are the artifacts and what are the pieces of evidence? And what evidence do I need to actually indicate different narratives and for different reasons? All need to be a part of that if you're doing it with Post-it notes or if you're doing it digitally on a Miro board, and to place out, where is my stuff? Let's pay attention to where my stuff is as a teacher, as a researcher, as a practitioner, whatever my identities are, and then start to make some connections to them. So I love, again, concepts of just taking a map and then using it. So even if you find any kind of map and then start to play the Post-it notes around things, and these kinds of travel maps are really interesting because, again, they're a good way for us to think about the things that sit behind, the things that are nested within when we're designing web pages. What are the landing pages? What are my navigation points? My navigation points are the chapters of my story, and how do I want the reader to actually work their way through my story? And if it doesn't matter, then what kind of navigation do I want to leave them to? Do I want to play in the rhizomic space, which is how I love digital folios to work? So they're about common threads of practice. That's what they teach you if you get your map right. They also teach you that through reflection and sense making, through curation and through presentation, it makes visible things to you that might have been invisible in your practice. What are the things that you're really good at that maybe haven't necessarily been presented yet? What are the underlying skills that every researcher has around project management, around communication, all of the things that sit underneath us with that in that horrible word of soft skills? And how do you actually present them so that the soft skills actually become the things that highlight or reify what it is that you know how to do? And for me, they're of research, they're as research, and they're for research. They actually support this becoming identity, which really as scholars we pay close attention to. But an actual active practice of portfolio work asks us to actually sit in that space all the time. It's not a thing that I have to go and do. It's actually a part of being a scholar. It's a part of being an active researcher, and it's a part of my activisms to actually tell the outside world what it is that I'm doing. And if you need to map the sky, the kind of thinking around multiple map making, what are we looking to and how are we connecting? And then to use these kinds of metaphors of connecting the dots, of creating new pathways. If orchid is my front page, then orchid's got to be bloody good. And most people's orchids are not. I visit lots of orchids and they're empty pages, but they've got them highlighted in their signature and then there's nothing there. They don't even take me to another site. I have to Google stalk them to find them. So how do you control the narrative of how people read you and see you and understand you? And then how do you present the work and make sure that it stays active? That is me.
Adding to the map, that is Kate Coleman. Thank you, Kate. Okay, so now we're over to Emily. Emily, we'll hand over to you.
Hello, and the sun's just come out really, really bright. I'll just start sharing my screen, sorry. So I'm Emily Fitzgerald. I'm one of the research data specialists at MDAP. And so I'm just going to be speaking in my 10 minutes just briefly about MDAP and ways that we can work with early career researchers and to a lesser extent PhD students, and then also talking about institutional repositories, mainly focusing on Minerva and Figshare. So that's not letting me click. Okay, so just briefly in terms of MDAP, because we're a group that a lot of people aren't familiar with. So we're a team of researchers, we're academic specialists working to enable data-intensive research across the disciplines at the university. So we're formed as part of the Peterscale Campus Initiative, which is a program on promoting data-intensive research across the university through infrastructure, through leadership, and through the workforce, which is us. So we work with people across the university, collaborating with people, working on various computing, and also looking at research, helping develop research outcomes and outputs, and so forth. So we're a fairly large team, and we're made up of people from various academic disciplines. Like my academic background, I'm a historian, and we've got other people from HAS, from social sciences. We've also got people from engineering, from sciences, with astrophysicists. We've got people from health, computer science, all over the place, and also a range of computational disciplines, so people speaking who work in different languages, and also have different areas of expertise. That way, whether it's data visualizations or machine learning or web scraping or all sorts of things. So we're a team of research data specialists and research data stewards, so we can help people in a range of different ways. And in terms of engaging with research, so we like working with people on particular projects that they've got going. You can, if you've just got some small questions or if you want advice or consultancy, you can just contact us, and we're happy to help. Sometimes that advice would be, you're probably best to speak to Skip, or you're probably best to speak to this other area. Sometimes it's something that we can help you with directly. And then we also have our more formal collaborations, which is where we partner. So you'll end up partnering with a group of people from MDAP and on a project that you're working on that involves data in some way. So it's an application process. We put out an EOI, and then there's a full application process. And then the group of applications are selected and we work with people. So with those, they're open to early career researchers. In fact, we strongly encourage early career researchers to apply. We really like working with early career researchers. Most of us are also early career researchers. Those ones we can't, not open to PhD students, but we can still collaborate with PhD students on projects and stuff like that. And one thing that often comes up when we're working with people is where to store information in institutional repositories, which is what I'm going to be talking about now. So in terms of, this is about where to be keeping your publications and where to be keeping your data. This is important both to keep your information safe and have access to it, and also to be able to share what you've done with other people. Sometimes you're not able to for whatever reason, but this is some of the various things you can do. So Minerva Access is the university's official institutional repository. So this is where you can store copies of your research publications, including theses. Like when you finish your PhD, you submit a copy of that into Minerva Access. But the repository also collects and stores, you can put in journal articles, conference papers, books, book chapters, theses, university publications, whether it's reports, papers, that sort of thing, creative works, and research data sets if they're related to a publication. So it's mainly focused towards traditional research output, but there is some scope for non-traditional research output in there as well. So yeah, and it actually stores copies of where you store copies of the thing, which also links to Minerva Elements, which I'll get to in a sec. There are limited file formats in terms of what types of files you can upload. Mainly it's PDF, MP3s, MP4s and JPEGs. There is a longer list, which if you have a look on the information that's available online that they say they can. I did spend some time working as a publications officer, and the types of file formats that we could upload was fairly limited. But again, that kind of links back to it being focused around traditional research outputs. What you can't store on Minerva Access is data that you're working on that isn't related to a publication, whether it's that you haven't published anything yet or you're still in the process of developing it and so forth. But it's still a good idea to have a safe place to store your data in a repository. And so Figshare is an alternative option that's also linked to Melbourne. There is Figshare generally, and then there's Figshare at Melbourne, which is Melbourne's particular instance of Figshare. It doesn't have all the features and functionalities of Figshare generally. I know Kate in particular has noticed some instances where there's different classifications, but they can update that and change that, and the people at Scholar Services who look after Figshare are very lovely. So Figshare, you can upload figures, databases, media, paper, posters, presentations, audiovisual file sets, all sorts of things. And you have control over what the access to that is. So you can have stuff on Figshare and make it completely private. You can have things on Figshare and share it with a limited group of people if you're working on a project. And you can also have things on Figshare and have that as a way to share it, have open data. And you can attach get a DOI, a digital object identifier, so a permanent link as a way to share and cite the research data that you have there. And the other thing with the Melbourne Figshare versus Figshare generally is it's stored locally, it's stored in Melbourne, if not Australia, as opposed to in the UK. And then kind of linking these various options is Minerva Elements. So Minerva Elements and Minerva Access are very closely tied together, but they are separate. So Minerva Elements essentially is where you record your metadata about your different, and your bibliographic details about your different publications and collections. So that if you enter something into Minerva Elements, that's where you can then go through to save a copy into Minerva Access. And Figshare can feed into it also, like if it's a collection of Web of Science, that feeds into Minerva Elements and stuff. So you don't need to manually enter everything into Minerva, but you then do need to go in and tweak it to kind of upload it properly. This is what populates. You find an expert profile if you have one. So if you're a staff member at the university and you have a publication, you can find an expert profile, and the publications that are listed on your find an expert profile come from Minerva Elements. It also feeds into the university's annual collection and the ERA data, and if you're a staff member, your PDF publications come linked to Minerva Elements as well. So it that's one place where you can keep a track of all the various publications that you've had while being associated, either a student or a staff member at the University of Melbourne. So if you're a student or staff member, when you published the article or when you recorded it, that's where it goes. And as I said, then you can then link to upload the files through Minerva Elements to go to Minerva Access as a way of keeping that and sharing that data. So Minerva Access does have then a public page where people can search for you and find your publications and read your publications. On the Research Gateway, there is a couple of very handy overviews of the different systems. So if you're not sure which one you should be using, that kind of compares what they offer. This one in particular is a particularly good one. The list table is a lot longer. So looking at what the various repository options, there are also obviously other places you can consider to store your data. There's things like MediaFlux, which I'm not that familiar with, to be honest. But this is in terms of having it as a way of sharing your work, the repositories are a good way to go. And that's just the MDAP contact information.
Thank you, Emily. Okay. Last but not least, I'm going to go a little bit tangential to what we've just looked at, and I was almost going to call my section in the trenches. I should have given a bit of an introduction at the start about what SCIP is and what we do. So we basically provide, I suppose, digital research support for researchers working across the humanities and social sciences. So we have a lot of researchers come to us looking to develop websites. So I'm kind of going on I suppose a little bit broader than the academic website, but I will hook back to that. So we have a lot of inquiries for people that want to create their own website, obviously to showcase or communicate their research findings. That might be for them individually, but it could also be for their research group who are looking at some way to collectively get their publications and their work out there. People are coming really with interest in being able to publish all sorts of things online in terms of non-traditional outputs, like people are publishing interactive maps, data visualizations, social network diagrams, and also wanting to create transcription and online text analysis tools. So that kind of leads us to, they come to us saying, well, SCIP, what are our options? So currently, I think what Emily just walked us through were the repositories to publish theses, PDFs, certain data sets. In terms of websites themselves, the university offers, I suppose, Squiz Matrix, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and Campus Press, which are the blogs. Now, all of those are kind of tied into the Uni Melbourne design. Quite often too, we tend to support a lot of ARC projects at the startup phase. And they're obviously collaborating, they're very cross-institutional. So one of the issues that we've come up against, quite quickly is that the Uni Melb systems don't allow external people to log in and edit content in the system. So anecdotally, creating a custom website, which can involve the hosting, the development, might have a graphic designer or developer, is going to range from $5,000 to potentially $50,000, plus ongoing running costs in terms of hosting, domain name, that kind of thing. And then there's the DIY options that a lot of people look towards. And these are your sort of classic WordPress, Wix or Foursquare services that will cost $10 to $60 a month. But again, you're still in that position where you might need some help setting that up. So what's the alternative? So what I might just show now is what we've been doing is, I suppose, testing, having a look at some of the kind of what alternatives are out there to be able to support researchers who are looking for websites they can spin up quite quickly. So hopefully what you're seeing on your screen now is a theme. What we've been doing is trialing this theme. It's something called, the theme is called Academic, and it's based on a technical framework called Hugo. There's lots of good things about this, which I'll come to, but it's a very, the template, as a template, works a lot like WordPress and that, and if you ever looked at all the WordPress templates, you see that they look quite similar. This is no different. Some of the benefits of this, though, is that it literally would take, just a matter of minutes to get up and running, and it's free. So, these are good options. In terms of the content you can host here, as you can hopefully see here, one of the real benefits here is that the pages are generated using something called Markdown, which is basically a plain text file. But when they're in the system, you can have syntax highlighting, which is kind of that little bit there. You'll see to highlight code. It can highlight all sorts of graphs, visualizations, maps, and that kind of thing. Now, it's interesting talking with people. Not many people locally seem to be aware of this, but it's quite big, I'm told, in the US. A lot of people, a lot of groups use this, and this is just one of the theme, but again, as I said, hooking back to our academic theme. Just to look for some examples, as I mentioned, a lot of individuals use this theme to spin up their own personal CV. Others have it for their research groups. So this is one example. This is Transport Systems Laboratory. I forget whether this was in Oxford. What does it say there? Imperial College, beg your pardon. So when we start to have a look at these sites, we'll see that they are template driven, so they're all very similar. But basically, it's a very, very customizable and easy way to present your work. So one of the themes that we've picked up on so far is I think about, having different types of content. Kate referenced the concepts of different gardens. We also spoke about having different audiences, that kind of thing. This is very modular in its approach, in that you can basically create blocks. Each of these segments that we're seeing here are different blocks that basically you can access just by obviously clicking on the navigation at the top. So that's one research group. In terms of a personal blog, this is Christopher Myers, who I assume is a real person. And Christopher's using this blog as many people do use this template. And it's a way, I suppose, for him to showcase his publications, the sites, excuse me, the sorts of experience that he has, projects, or these sorts of things. So it's Christopher. Now this is the basic kind of design or template. So as you can see, these are kind of very blocks. They're very block driven, but these are all quite easy to customize. You can take substitute blocks. You can actually create your own if you're feeling so inclined. And obviously link off, whether this becomes, it was interesting listening to Kate talk about the gardens. It was like, well, you might have various gardens. Do you need one garden to rule them all? I'm not sure. But this is an easy way, I suppose, to aggregate and to link off to publications, projects, that kind of thing. So we're running out of time, I see. What I would like to do, though, just to demonstrate probably why we're interested in this, is just how quickly it is to spin up a new website. So what I might do is, there's two requirements really to have this, is that what we're doing is using this platform called Netlify that will sort of host the site for free. And virtually what it's also doing is creating a copy of all these files in our test GitHub repository that we have. So it literally just takes a couple of minutes, and it's building the site now. Excuse me. So as you can see up here, site deploy is in progress. Basically what it's done is taken a copy of that template, and it's created a unique domain for me, which will be the home for my new website. You can see now that's green, so that's live. What I might quickly do though is I'll go into site settings. We can change the site name. I had a quirky site name, I don't know. So the beauty is here, free hosting, we can customize the domain name to whatever we want. And there's my copy of the website up and running. So what I might do, let's see, how do I get to back to the chat? I'll put this in the, no, I won't. I'll do that at the end. Yeah, so I'll put the URL in the chat. So you can click, you can go straight to this website now. This is obviously just a template straight out of the box, but you can see how easy that was to create. The other thing that I kind of like about this approach is that as you update it, this is the sample GitHub repository that I mentioned. You can see that it's just made a copy here. So in terms of reproducibility, in terms of wanting to move the website at any stage, all the files sit here. So the beauty of that is getting around some of the issues around hosting, things like WordPress that can be quite prone to virus attacks. Also, if you ever have to back up your materials, it can be a bit onerous exporting your content out of WordPress. Some of the suggestions I've seen is even at the end of a project website, excuse me, is creating PDFs of each page, which I think would be somewhat of a laborious thing to do. So whether it's your personal CV or it could be for a project, again, GitHub is a free service, and you can have as many repositories as you like. So this is an alternative. I think it'd be great to see this sort of thing supported through the university. There's a lot of merit for some of the new approaches than going your traditional kind of CMS route. So these are my screenshots that I'm in a habit of putting in just in case I don't have internet, but then realized if I don't have internet, I won't be talking to you. So just briefly, some of the requirements is obviously we basically looked at the academic theme and created a new website based on that. All these accounts, these are all free. We use Netlify to host the website and the domain. GitHub becomes the home of my files, my website. And what we didn't look at is we use RStudio as a way to kind of edit the content and upload that. The beauty of this, one of the other beautiful things about this is that once this is set up, is that as we edit our files in RStudio and upload them to GitHub, it's got automatic deployment. So as soon as we update the GitHub repository, the website automatically rebuilds and the magic all happens behind the scenes, which is a lovely thing. So just finally, considerations, it's great to use. It's quite enjoyable. I suppose the ease at setting it up. It's obviously free, it's easy to set up, really supports the concepts around reproducibility and digital preservation by design, because that's basically how it's built. It's not like creating a WordPress website or having a graveyard of WordPress websites that somehow you've got to think, how am I going to get all the content out or link these together? The con, however, is that very easy to implement. There's a few different ways to build these. It is obviously a learning curve to customize the design of the website and then to maintain. Once it's customized, that work's done. You don't have to do that again. But obviously maintaining it is when you're publishing, new pages. It handles pages, blog posts. We've been using it in Skip as part of our training repository. So we put up interactive maps, data tables, all sorts of things it will handle. Excuse me. I think that was it for me. How are we going for time?
Greg, and thank you to all of our presenters and speakers. So this was supposed to be a 1 hour session. We have about 2 minutes left, but if our presenters have other engagements, please feel free to attend to those. If not, we can stay for another 10-15 minutes to take any questions that you may have. The Q&A is a big part of this, all of our webinar sessions, so we want to give you enough time to ask any questions. I'm just going to go over some of the questions that were raised in the Q&A, and if you have any others, please feel free to put them in there. So one question that was raised was that, I'm not this is open to all of our presenters, I'm not a user of social media, no blog or Twitter. Is that a reason not to set up an academic website? Time?
Thanks, Trent. I wrote a little piece in the chat about this one. I think in many ways it's a good reason too. Particularly if you want that to be your source of focus, you want to do long form explications of what you're working on, and you really want to bring everything together in one space without having to divert your attention to connecting all of these different platforms and social media sites, then it could be a really fantastic outlet for that. So I don't necessarily think that not connecting to a social platform or any other account that isn't the website is a negative necessarily.
Okay, let's see. One thing that I also answered in chat, but in case it wasn't clear, is the need to kind of also consider your own research agenda, as well as your field of research and the conventions of that field, because like I mentioned, for instance, a computational researcher may have a different skill set, and they may use that skill set to actually create a website that may or may not look different to, say, a WordPress site. I think the example that Greg provided is one such example where the Netlify sites or the Hugo sites require somewhat of a different approach to a WordPress site. And they're very big with people in academia who tend to do kind of digital work, which is something that Skip focuses on. And one of the key advantages of a Netlify site, for instance, is the syntax highlighting that Greg was talking about, the ability to write code and also share it with a wider audience. But increasingly, what we see is that a lot of researchers that are outside of the digital or computational realm are also using Netlify because, again, it's free hosting, free domain names, and unless you're doing something really, really big and large scale, there are basically no costs associated with maintaining the website. Kate, do you have anything to add to that question of kind of Facebook versus, so your private life and kind of merging that maybe with your academic life? How does one kind of deal with that? Because that is increasingly becoming, I guess, a little bit of a problem maybe for academics.
It's a careful interplay. And so for some of us, we're able to kind of merge those identities together, and others, they carefully craft them out independently to ensure that they tell a different story to different spaces. And they use multiple platforms to tell those different stories really well. I was just going to post in, because my current academic crush, Tara Brabazon, uses her personal website from Flinders really beautifully, because then what she does is actually break up her different kinds of work by saying what the topic is and then having the hyperlink. So you get sent out to her YouTube channel, you get sent out to her Twitter feed, you get sent out to her Academia EDU profile. Each of those have very different activities in them where she's presenting different types of work and leading different types of professional learning communities. So again, it depends. Some of us intertwine them and interconnect them. I think that's got to come back to your philosophy and the narrative. If you tell this interconnected, intertwined story at the beginning, and then not having that, is kind of problematic for the audience who's landing on you. I think the other bit is, do you want to be found accidentally or do you want to be found purposely? They make that they put different design parameters around things. They have constraints. If I want to be accidentally found on the net, then I've got to be playing those identities together, because it's the networks that are actually providing that algorithm to talk in multiple spaces. If I don't want that, if I have this kind of niche space and I want to maintain everything in one environment, then I'm going to run a very different kind of profile and maybe disconnect, as lots of academics do. They have different academic Twitter handle names, for instance, than they do. They don't use their hashtags to connect things. It's all about that story that you're trying to tell, that narrative. And if you have a single line narrative, you have multiple versions.
Yeah,
it's
and
not an easy answer.
Sorry, Kate, I'll just add to that because Joan has put in the chat a really useful question, which is the question of discoverability. And to go back to sort of point one of my 10 tips is at the moment of the plan, you have to make a call about the extent to which you want the network of discoverability to work and flex and bend in particular ways. And if in the instance of the discussion we're having around the personal website, the academic website that doesn't connect to social media, that's a strategic choice to make sure that that is closed off in certain ways. So if it is to be discoverable, a whole nother avenue has to be thought about in terms of connecting it. And the question of whether you can then connect the personal page from the uni profile page is a really interesting one, because at the level of sort of digital semantics, that sends quite an interesting message, which is that you're not necessarily discoverable through your personal page. The key point of interface is the uni page, but you kind of want that audience to look somewhere else. So that audience is probably thinking, am I being taken over here to be told a different story? Or am I being taken over here to be told the same story?
And just to add to that, I think those are great responses also for those considering perhaps the kind of, whether to go with, the find an expert page versus a personal page. Also remember that when it comes to site metrics, you can use free tools like Google Analytics to actually, kind of find out who's actually going to your website, who's checking it out, where the traffic is coming from. That's not something that you can do with Find an Expert, because that obviously sits on a university server, at least as far as I'm aware. But maybe this is kind of tied to that question. Again, this question kind of keeps coming up, is if I have a Find an Expert page or an academia.edu, something we haven't talked about, or a ResearchGate page, what is the motivation to then go ahead and, learn about Netlify and GitHub, or even just a very simple WordPress site? Because even if you don't have to, even if there are no startup costs, you still have to kind of keep up with it, right? I think Greg brought up the point that as academics, I know I've done this in the past. I have, a graveyard of WordPress sites that I just kind of forget about. So what is the motivation for perhaps not so much the monetary cost, but the cost of constantly having to update a page if I have a Find an Expert page, or if I have an academia.edu page that I can just post a PDF to?
My short answer to that question might mean just casting your mind back to Miriam Posner's page, which I showed in that slide. That snapshot of the simplicity, the books, the kind of the way that narrative is being crafted sends a very specific message that cannot be articulated on any of the other mediums that pre-provide the template. So in the first instance, if we're talking about what is the advantage when I have so many other options, I would say it depends on how much of an aesthete you are, and how picky you are about being able to have autonomy over the kind of aesthetics and storytelling of the digital space on that website. And back to my original point, how much traffic you want to send there through these other mediums. Because don't think about it as one versus the other necessarily. In ways that Kate really excellently articulated, it's a kind of a garden in which things are growing out of other things, and we're being directed in different places, often for specific reasons, not just so that everything hangs together and everything looks the same.
Yep, and in some ways, the personal website, I think, also gives you the kind of that creative edge to post more than just your research narrative. I know that, I'm an early career researcher myself. I know that when I was on the job market, I was able to kind of, maybe just create even, on a very basic template, just a tab that was dedicated to my CV. So in some ways, I was able to post my CV for the world to see. Now, whether that's something you want to do or not, that's a different story. But even things like, when you apply for jobs, again, as early career researchers, just being able to kind of see if there's traffic coming to you. I mean, I was able to kind of find out which one of the places that I had applied to was actually checking out my website based on, the geographical location. So, yeah, I agree with all of those. And there's definitely, I think that in the long term, the kind of the human cost, or, the skill cost of having to learn some of these tools is definitely worth it. Are there any other questions or anything else that our panelists want to talk about briefly? I think we probably have another couple of minutes.
I have to sadly leave, but I was going to say very quickly, one of the things that I watch too many research projects do is buy a site, pay for it for a year, and then it's left. And what happens if you don't even archive those sites is that if you go back to the public good, which is what we do research with public money, you have some responsibility to archive that work digitally and to care for it. The ethics of care around digital work needs to be fundamental to the way that we work. So there's the role of my own digital identity as a scholar and as a researcher, as an educator, but there's also the amazing amount of labour that so many people do, often in precarious roles, whose work should be cared for in sites. And so if you're buying a domain and putting a massive project there for 2 years, and then it just is left to be overgrown and never looked after and no one's even cached the site, and I go to that link in years' time and it's gone, the actual purpose of the research and all that labour that people put into it just is pointless. I think it's, that's got to be sitting underneath it. The ethics of digital work and digital curation and digital archiving, I think, has got to be somehow attached to our identities, and then work out how we do that story. There's some responsibility in it, I guess, that we have to hold.
I think that I think our panelists have done an incredible job. So I want to thank all of them, Dr. Coleman, Dr. Sumner, and Dr. Fitzgerald as well. Thank you for sharing your insights, and thank you all for joining us. Before we let you go, just want to remind you that we have the second part of this webinar series coming up on academic CVs on Thursday, September the 17th at 3 p.m. And the final part of the series is going to be held on October the 8th at 3 p.m. And that one is on managing your social media presence. So I know that some of the questions that came up today kind of had to do with that. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. Greg, do you have any parting words at all?
No, not really. Other than thanks everyone for coming along. Hope I think it was some really insightful observations, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone. See you next time. Thank you.